Hey everyone, this is Carol Williams with Strategic Decision Solutions, and I have with me today Julian Rierson. We are going to be talking about talent and HR and the risks that and opportunities that exist for companies. We want to really dive deep into that. So before we do, Julian, why don't you give a little background for yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Carol, for having me. My name is Julian Rierson. I've spent the last 11 years in enterprise risk management, and before that, I spent probably the last 15 to 18 years in human resources. And currently, I'm an adjunct instructor at Columbus State University, where I teach business, but focus primarily on the HR courses around compensation, benefits administration, employee relations, and general management practices. So that's just a little bit about me to kind of give a background.
Thank you so much. As anybody can tell, you're very well versed to be able to talk about this stuff, especially considering that it impacts every single organization around the world. It doesn't matter how big or how small, what sector you're in, what industry you're in. You always have to think about the people side of the business, and no business is successful without good people behind it. So we've had a lot of information and news floating around regarding the Great Resignation. Now there's the quiet quitting. What would you say is the biggest HR risk out there for companies that they need to be thinking about as they look into 2023?
I think you really need to look at your HR strategic plan as far as how do you plan to hire, and then how do you plan to retain the individuals. I think when you start looking at the demographic change of the workforce, so you have a couple of different components. You have where you're trying to retain an older workforce, because they have the knowledge base that you're looking to retain, but at the same time, you're trying to bring in the younger workforce as well, as they're trying to start jobs, and you're trying to get people in to fill positions, and you're trying to do that knowledge transfer that needs to occur, but they have completely different needs and what they're looking for. Also, from a demographic perspective, when you start looking at, we'll just take universities, for example, males are no longer the dominant graduating from a male-female perspective, or not the largest graduating population now. So now you have a greater number of females in the workforce, which are degrees. So if you say that you require a degree, the likelihood of you, male versus female candidates, depending on what you're looking at, you're going to end up probably hiring a female candidate, and they may have a different need than a male when you start looking at overall needs and requirements of the workforce. And then you start looking at demographics as far as family, when you're looking at single family homes, dual family homes, where are people wanting to work from, and their needs, whether it's remote or whether it's a hybrid component. Now you're starting to see more hybrid programs coming into play now, where people are returning to work or into the office a day or two a week, depending on what's going on there. I think HR really needs to really look at how they're supporting the business. How can they support the business the best, and how can they leverage the compensation, right? Because a lot of places, the salaries have all been going through the roof. As people are trying to compete, they're continuing to wait to increase salaries. But the really unique thing about this is that it's not retaining people. People continue to leave. And then on top of that, as people continue to leave, I can't remember, there was a study that I reviewed within the last couple of days that basically said it, even going into 2023, even with some of the layoffs that have occurred at the big companies, 50% of employees are still looking to change jobs. And that's contradictory to what you would think.
Yeah.
Especially when people are looking at recession trends, you're having layoffs. Normally that's when people say, I'm going to stay at my job. I'm not going to go anywhere. And we still have a pretty significant part of the population that says, I'm willing to take that risk, which is different than maybe years past. So I think that's one of the big things is, how is compensation going to support? Do I have the right compensation benefits package together to retain the people that I have? Do I have the right flexibility? Do I have maybe daycare or childcare components start taking more of a precedence now. Do I have the right time off? Does it look right? Does it feel right? I think that's a really big thing when it comes to hiring, and HR's role is, does the company have the right things in place to support the company's needs and where it's trying to go from a talent perspective? And can you get that talent? And once you do get that talent, can you retain that talent?
Right.
So
And it sounds like too that the talent strategy does need to be very well connected to the overall corporate strategy, right?
oh yeah, for sure.
Because if you don't know where the company's trying to go over the next 3 to 5 years, you can't hire and retain to meet those needs. So you always have to look at that as well, correct?
Yeah, I mean, because you can't always hire senior level and consultant level, and these senior level positions or level 3, 4, whatever your terminology or your business is. You're going to have to hire some ones or level 1s and 2s or entry level, and you need to skill them up as a part of the process in a lot of cases in order to fill positions and also to stay within budget, because you just can't continually to escalate, what you're paying, especially in businesses that are very employee centric or from a cost perspective, where 70, 80, 90% of their cost is what they're paying in employees.
So you mentioned an interesting statistic around people that are still willing to leave their job, even in today's economic environment, no matter where you are in the world. There's the economic situation is kind of volatile, I think.
Yeah.
It's a good way to put it.
Mhm.
But that is a very high statistic. And a lot of people will go, it's because I'm not paying enough, or we don't have the right benefits or whatever. There's another component called culture, right? That plays a very significant part in a person's decision whether or not they want to stay at a company, even if they're getting paid great.
Yeah.
They still don't want to be there because of the culture. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I would wholeheartedly agree. And that's what part of the remote work has changed the culture, right? You had your inherent culture that you had before COVID, and when people were seeing each other, and you could pass along, how you did things and how the company operated, and just, it was really easy to show the culture through action, right? But now you work when you work through remote, it's much harder to see unless you're very intentional about it. And you have to be a lot more intentional about showing, this is who we are. This is how we want you to act, behave, and treat one another, and treat our customers and our clients. But also, I think, to use it's kind of a catchphrase term, but a culture of trust that's being commonly used right now. But really, what you're saying in that culture of trust is, I'm not going to micromanage you, and I'm not going to always say, hey, look, you got to work 8 to 4. Just get the work done. I don't care if from 8 to 12 you work, and then you go do something between 12 and 1 or 2 o'clock with your kids, whatever. And then you come back and you start working at the end of the day, and you work on the back half, or you work at 8 o'clock at night till midnight, whatever works for your individual schedule. And you say, hey, look, I'm trusting you as the employer, that you as an employee will respect me and honor the company by doing the right thing and making sure that the work gets done, even if that means today you only work 6 hours and tomorrow you work 10 or 12 hours because you're making time up or whatever you want to do, or that it just needs to get done, or you separate your day out 4 or 5 in the morning and another 4 to 5 in the evening because of whatever's going on with family dynamics or whatever. I just that culture of trust is really, really difficult, and historically, management has always tended to take a micromanaging approach, and that doesn't work well to establish trust, right?
Right.
And so I think that's another change that we're seeing, is those companies that can get their employees to trust them are becoming more successful in this hybrid/remote working environment, and are also able to leverage that to help retain people, because employers are like, okay, they trust me to get it done. They're not always looking over my shoulder, or, hey, great, this is a great perk from from a benefit perspective, whatever you want to look at it. But, people historically, from a management perspective, as long as their pay and benefits are competitive, they're willing not to move if they feel comfortable where they're working at. I mean, historically, you have seen that once people understand and realize that the industry in which they're in, if the pay is at least competitive, maybe above competitive, slightly above, they're not just going to leave for another, 25 cents or $1,000, depending on what type of job you're looking at. They're going to stay because they know what they have. They know they're in a good environment. And they also know probably if they change, that may not be the case, or those dynamics are going to change and they just don't want to deal with the change component again.
Because the grass is not always greener on the other side.
No, it's not. It is not. That is for sure.
Well, and I think there's another component, and you kind of hinted at it when you were talking about your culture of trust, but the fact that the employees want to know that their job is contributing in a meaningful way to the company. So even if they are getting paid a little less than a competitor would pay them, they're contributing in a meaningful way, and they see that happening. What do you think about that?
Now, I agree with that. I think when you can connect the dots and when someone feels valued, but also what they do is important. Someone may value you, but if you can connect the dots to what the role they're doing is either A, important to the company in and of itself, or B, even more so, how it actually supports the client, the end consumer, whatever it may be, people tend to gravitate because now I have value outside of just performing a task. And now this task takes on a greater meaning. So hopefully it's done with greater sense of pride because now they can connect the impact as if, hey, look, this person's on, counting on this service to be performed well because it's going to their grandmother, or they're going to their kid, or it's going to overall benefit the family, or this is a service because it's somewhere in, even something as simple as processing a credit card. It needs to go through because especially this time of year, and budgets are tight, people trying to buy Christmas, whatever it may be, it impacts people at the family level. And so I think when you can make those connections and emotional connections, it really helps a job resonate with an individual and make them more willing to really stay with the company, but also take pride in what they're doing because they understand the value that they're actually truly producing. It's not just numbers and widgets and whatever.
I completely agree with that. And I'm going to circle back to your culture of trust, because there's something that I think back to pre-2020. And the conversations that always happened around remote work was, I need to be able to measure the work that they're doing to hold them accountable, right? And so managers even then were saying, I'm okay with them working remotely as long as I can see the work that they're doing, right? Not from a micromanaging, but an accountability perspective. Do you believe that still needs to be the case today, even with that culture of trust?
Yeah, I think you have to. I had a manager that always once said, he goes, trust but verify. And he goes, just trust that it's going to get done, but verify that it's been done the way that you want it done, or how you expect it done, or it's going to be delivered on time. Make sure people don't need help for whatever reason. It's not that you can say, let's say there's something due on Friday or whatever, and on Wednesday you go, hey Bob, or hey Sue, hey, is everything looking good for Friday? Do you need any help? Any questions about what the deliverables are? Did you have any problems with X, Y, and Z? And you're not micromanaging, but you are asking or confirming and making yourself available, that they know that if they do need help, they can approach you, or maybe they haven't, and because of time constraints or meeting challenges, whatever it is, but they know that you're there to support. And also it is kind of still reconfirming the expectation. Hey, look, we have a meeting on Friday. It needs to be done by Friday. And here's a key component. So, hey, how are we looking on X, Y, and Z? Now I'm just reinforcing what I needed to have done on Friday without saying, did you do it? I want to see this, unless there's something that, you may ask, hey, do you want to talk about it in advance, or do we need to review it in advance on Thursday, blah, blah, blah. or whatever, but it doesn't come across as much micromanaging when you're asking questions saying, hey, look, I'm here to help. Do you need anything? And often that leads into a conversation where we'll say, no, I've got this taken care of, I've done this and this and this, where you've gotten the information that you needed without just being so blunt about it. I think it's more of trust, but verify. I always like that because ultimately, as a leader, you're still responsible for making sure a deliverable happens. So you're still accountable. So it still means you have to hold your people accountable, but you can also do it in a way that doesn't come across as looking over someone's shoulder the entire time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense. The way that I've always done it with my team, and when I was managing people as an employee, I always had the policy of, I always prefer questions while you're working on it rather than getting the final product and realizing it's going to have to be redone or it was done wrong because questions weren't asked at the very beginning. So please ask questions as you're working through it so that we can make sure it's done right the first time and done well the first time. But that method that you have is also a really great one because as a manager, it reduces your stress and your worry that is it going to be done right? Is it going to be done well and on time? You can say, okay, my team's got it. Stress off of me, which makes you then a better manager in general when you're not stressed. So take the opportunity to reduce as much stress as possible for sure. Is there any big nugget of information from your HR background and your ERM background that you would like to share with everyone today?
As it relates to, HR and people, going off of what you just said, I think communication. I think, especially when you're working remote, whether it's sending an email, whether it's sending an instant message of some sort, whatever the system may be, or whether it's a weekly team meeting, is being present, helping people understand this is what we're trying to do, this is the direction we're trying to go, and being clear on those expectations from the very beginning. I think it helps you not have to micromanage, where you can just check in as well, where you're saying, hey, look, here are like the 5 things that we need to make sure gets included in this presentation. Let me know if you have any questions about X, Y, and Z. Making sure everything's really clear, well-defined, and then allow people to ask questions. But also when people do ask questions, especially when they're learning, or even a more senior person that's learning as well, maybe they've changed departments or something, is that you don't execute them before asking the question, or it doesn't come across as a hassle. Because we get busy, right? And we're all firefighting, we're doing our own thing, we have our own projects, our own deadlines. But kind of how we come across body language wise, even in the video, and I would say that's probably even more critical, is when you're doing video meetings, make sure the video is turned on, that you can see someone, that you still have the ability to have some of those visual cues off of how someone responds from a facial gesture or to even some body language, especially a person that talks with hands like myself. If my camera's down a little bit, you can see my hands, right? So, or even now you can see my hands. So, you still get some of those visual cues, so it helps you know someone's listening, and that you're being intentional about it, that you're not just trying to do something else on the side. And I think that's a really big thing, is always being present in the conversations with employees, whether it's a one-on-one or whether it's a group, to say, hey, look, I'm giving you my undivided attention. I'm here. Ask me questions, not a problem. We'll work through it. Even if that means taking time and making time, I will make the time within my schedule to help whatever we're trying to do, because you want them to come with you. And if you shut them down off the start, they'll never come back again. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, that damage has been done through that first impression. So I think, as always, communication, is always going to be critical, whether it's hybrid, in face, or completely remote. I think that's absolutely critical.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things that you were just talking about was the use of the video, right? One of the things I've actually I won't say regressed, but I have reverted back to something is I've looked at my team and the personalities and how people work and recognize that some people don't like to be on video all the time. Like they feel very uncomfortable being on video. And it is possible to get like Zoom fatigue right? Because you feel like you're on video all day long. Me,
Yeah.
I'm on video calls all day long, a lot of days. And so recognizing when some people are just like, are you okay if we don't have the camera on? Or you prefer to do a phone call? Okay, not a problem. That's okay with us. Having that willingness to adjust to their preferred way of communication is also good, because then there can be other tells if they're engaged. As much as I love using body language and facial expressions, you can also tell by tone of voice and how much they're talking in the call. Like, how much are you talking versus how much are they talking and asking questions and everything. So I feel like that's also one of those pieces as part of that culture and that trust, is let them make a judgment call on what's their preferred way of communicating as well. So that's my little view based on how I've been able to manage my team, and it's seems to be working. So I'll go with that. But I love video.
Adapt.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to adapt, to your people. And of course, I have a video preference just because I like to see faces and that's my thing. But I mean, there's, depending on the situation, especially if someone's sick, look, just listen in, or participate, but don't do the video. I don't want to, see you coughing or, whatever it is, it's kind of, it goes back to that EQ, emotional intelligence factor of managers, and it becomes even more critical as the workforce becomes more dynamic. I think it's something you definitely have to take into account, which has always historically been a challenge before COVID and before any remote work. Even face-to-face, that was difficult. So I think that hasn't left the workplace, and it will continue to always be. So, but very good point for sure.
So, well, Julian, thank you so much. You've definitely given some great nuggets of insight into the HR world and for what ERM people need to be thinking about when it comes to looking into the future, making sure that there's a good HR strategy, a talent strategy for recruiting, retaining, thinking about culture, the culture of trust, but just a general company culture and how it impacts people to want to stay. Even if the compensation is good, the culture impacts the desire to stay. So all great things. So thank you so much for your insights today.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Carol.
All right. Bye, everyone.